Hey Jet Team, welcome to the channel. It's Ryan. If you haven't been here before, I'm a former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, and current commercial pilot. And I use that experience to break down epic aviation videos and stories for you. And someone on the BJet Clean Instagram asked if I could give an update and just some of my thoughts on the Ghost of Kyiv. So ask and you shall receive, my friend. So stay to the very end of this video to get my final thoughts on the legend of the Ghost of Kyiv. But before we get going, if you would, just dominate that like button for me. And hey, maybe even subscribe. Every time you like and subscribe, a pilot somewhere gets their wings. With that said, let's dive into the Ghost of Kyiv. So a quick update on the Ukraine versus Russia from an Air Force perspective. Russia has roughly 1,500 attack aircraft. Now, not all of those are operational. Some of those are going to be what's called a hangar queen or king, which means that they're used to supply parts for the rest of the fleet. However, they're still sitting at about 1,500, whereas Ukraine has roughly 56. So at first glance, obviously the clear advantage goes to Russia. But before we get too far down that road, let's talk about what Russia's actually using and what aircraft are actually operational and flying at least some combat missions. So those aircraft are the Su-27, the Su-30, the Su-34, and the Su-35. Now, don't get me wrong. Those aircraft can be capable and can be a worthy foe at times, but none of them are stealth. And if you've seen the news lately, a lot of Western countries and NATO are helping Ukraine by supplying them with surface-to-air missiles. Now, Russia's not dumb. They understand that all those planes I just mentioned a second ago are all susceptible of being shot down by those surface-to-air missiles. Now, there's no official no-fly zone, but what I'm seeing is there is a de facto no-fly zone that is essentially being created, and Russia knows that there is a high potential of losing aircraft. I mean, this is very contested airspace. It's not like they can just fly wherever they want like they can in Syria. So this is a different ballgame, and this is something that's definitely making all those pilots of those fourth generation fighters think twice every time they step into the cockpit. So definitely not a good place to be if you are a fourth generation fighter pilot in Russia, because Ukraine's definitely taking away some of the advantage of numbers with this de facto no-fly zone. Now you're probably saying, but Ryan, in Top Gun, Russia, or whatever country that was, had Su-57s, right? They had these amazing stealth aircraft. Well, Russia has essentially made 5 Su-57s, but none of them are operational. I mean, maybe one becomes operational for a little bit, and then they understand that it's not quite as capable as they wish it would, or it's not quite as stealthy as they wish it was, and they're learning that it's actually susceptible to being shot down by some of these advanced weapon systems that are being sent into Ukraine. So while the Su-57 is, it's like a 4.5 generation fighter is what I would call it. There are some stealthy elements. It is definitely not a stealth fighter, in my humble opinion. So that's why the Su-57 is not necessarily giving Russia an edge. So let's take a peek at what has happened so far in the Ghost of Kyiv conflict. So essentially in the first few days of the conflict, there was a rumor that a single Ukrainian fighter pilot had shot down over 40 Russian aircraft. Now, since then, the Ukrainian Air Force has come out and said, no, you know what? The Ghost of Kyiv was not one single person, but it was actually a combined effort from many different pilots and other ground forces in the Ukrainian military. Because the rumor was Major Steven Tarabalka was the pilot who did this. He's a Su-27 pilot, and they're saying that he actually was the one to shoot down 40 Russian aircraft. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a stretch, but essentially what I've seen from a fighter pilot perspective is there are certain missions, and I've done this on training missions, when you're out doing what's called defensive counter-air, you're defending a point, which is what the Ukrainian fighter pilots would be doing, where I'm leading the formation and I'm turning our formation, we turn back in, we shoot the bad guys, we turn again, and then we shoot the bad guy again. Me personally as a flight lead, my number one concern isn't racking up kills. I'm not trying to become an ace. I'm trying to achieve the mission and make sure everybody comes home safe. And the best way for me to do that is essentially to be the quarterback of my formation and direct certain elements to take certain shots at other aircraft. So honestly, at the end of the day, if I have a full missile load and I come home and everybody was safe and we shot down every bad guy trying to get to the point, I'm okay with that. And ultimately, I want to retain my missiles as a flight lead because I want to be there in case last second someone's got to save the day or there's some essentially a scenario that calls for a really high risk. I want to be the person to take it. So I don't want to wind up with 0 missiles, which is why I think a younger member of the flight might empty out all their missiles first and potentially become an ace before a flight lead could. So while it's possible, 40 in a couple days is a little bit high, but again, it is possible for a younger person like Major Steven Tarabalka to get a lot of kills essentially early on in a conflict and become an ace. There were also rumors that the Ghost of Kyiv was the Grey Wolf. And the Grey Wolf was a MiG-29 pilot who was an incredible aviator, and I actually got to see him operate his aircraft up close and personal. I got to see him at the Royal International Air Tattoo, and he did some incredible things with his MiG-29. His name was Alexander Oskinchenko, and he's also known as the Grey Wolf. He actually won Best in Flight in 2017 for the way that he flew his MiG-29. I was there with the Thunderbirds and the cloud deck was extremely low. So we were operating below the cloud deck, just doing a couple maneuvers that we could do. We couldn't go over the top, which means do loops because the clouds were down so low. But the Grey Wolf, he made it happen. He was a single ship, so way more maneuverable than the Thunderbirds were. And he actually found little points in the sky where the clouds were clear, and he was doing loops and over the top maneuvers. Incredibly impressive pilot, but unfortunately the Grey Wolf flew his last sortie in the early days of the Ukraine conflict. So could the Grey Wolf have been the Ghost of Kyiv? Sure, but I think it'd be closer to the scenario that I told you about before, where he would have gotten maybe 5 or 6 kills in the first few days, but he wouldn't have hit 40. So you made it to the end of the video, and I'm a man of my word. I will give you the bonus details. Now, the Ghost of Kyiv, while I don't think was an individual pilot, and obviously that's come out in the news that it wasn't, but it could definitely be a squadron and a combined effort of aviators teamed up with some of the new missile systems that are being sent over by the US and Germany. Recently in the news, Germany has said that they are sending an IRIS-T, which is essentially a heat-seeking weapon system. Now, there's different variants of this. There's actually variants of this that can be loaded onto aircraft and used like an AIM-9, but it's more capable. There's also surface-to-air variants of it. So Germany's been hush-hush about which variant they're sending over. They're simply just telling us that that's the baseline of the weapon system that they're sending. So this could have been combined with the Ukrainian Air Force to get all those kills in the early days of the conflict. And the cool thing about the weapon system as well that Germany has mentioned is that they can use it to defend an entire city. So things like this, if we continue to do it, could change the tide of the entire conflict. And most of all, I hope all this is over extremely soon. I'll keep you updated as things develop. Go ahead and hit me up on the BJetClean Instagram and let me know if there's any other subjects that you would like me to cover. So glad you're here. Most of all, hope you have a great